Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Public Affairs in Practice podcast. One of the challenges that often come up in the public affairs training that I do is how to build a career in public affairs. Maybe some trends in the public affairs job market, and in particular, tips for candidates looking for new roles. So I thought, rather than hearing me give my views, I would invite some of the leading recruiters in public affairs to give us their thoughts. So in this episode, you're going to hear from Ross Picton of Taylor Birchwood, Janine Emmerson of Hanson Search, Alec Zetter of Vox Partners, Rohan Shah of Reuben Sinclair, and Pritchard of Door 10 Recruitment. I want to thank them all for giving up their time to share their insights with us. So let's start by hearing from Pritchard.
My name is Pritchard, and having worked in fairly high-level corporate affairs roles myself, I set up Door 10 last year. Door 10 is a specialist recruiter / headhunter focusing on corporate affairs roles at all levels. We're quite role-specific, specialise in policy, public affairs, communications and campaigns roles, but we don't really have a specific type of client. We've recruited for big corporates and smaller charities and everything in between. I think in terms of what makes a great public affairs professional, obviously it depends a bit on the level of role you're going for. There's lots of really exceptional public affairs professionals who come at the job from different angles and bring different levels of experience. But I always do think that a working knowledge of process, not only in Parliament but also Whitehall, is quite important. And the more contacts you have, the better, obviously. When I'm talking to people about public affairs roles, I tend to give them a scenario, like, for example, a client or an employer asks them to design a campaign against the imposition of a particular tax. Can you please plot out step by step what you would do? In terms of advice on building a career in public affairs, a very basic answer, sorry about this, is that it can be really useful to just build a network, people that you can turn to for advice, or as you go on through the years, they'll be connected to jobs that you're interested in, so you can approach them informally. That stuff's really invaluable, but it isn't as simple as just sort of connecting with somebody on LinkedIn. Networks are a two-way street, so you have to be prepared to put the work in yourself. This can be as simple as comments on LinkedIn, providing positive feedback, being available to give advice if somebody asks you for it, or just sort of showing up to the occasional event that you could do without, but somebody in your network's putting you on and they need a bit of support, so you grin and bear it. I think they're good ways to maintain networks. The other thing I would mention about sort of job specific stuff is you have to do your homework, and I'm not just talking about sort of prior to an interview. It goes on longer than that. It's even when you've got the job. So my career took me to a wide variety of employers in different industries, and it can be quite difficult at first to completely get on top of what an organisation does. I know obviously McDonald's sells fast food and Gatwick is an airport, but there are other sort of businesses that have a wide variety of business lines and offers, and you have to sort of get to grips with all of them. You might just be this central hub, so you need to be able to arrange meetings, get to know people, get to learn people within the organisation you work in order to sort of get on top of everything they do and become a sort of expert. I also think McDonald's sells fast food and Gatwick's an airport, but there's even with organisations that it seems quite does what it says on the tin like those, there is still a wide variety of nuance and services within those organisations, and you're gonna have to sort of in your first few months really get on top of everything that they do. So in terms of trends in the public affairs job market, I think the first thing to say, which many of your listeners will know already, is that the market is quite tough at the moment. The last role I recruited for, we had 350 applicants in 3 days, I think, and the client only wanted to interview 2. So even getting to the interview stage, a lot of these times is massive progress, a big achievement. So you should feel really proud of yourself if you get there. And at the same time, try not to be too down if you aren't having any luck. The vast majority of candidates are in the same boat, and I just speaking to somebody who recruits and who sees the quality of applications, it's not always a reflection on you if you don't get to the interview round. It's a reflection of the sheer volume of people who have applied for the position. Somebody might have worked in a slightly more related industry or role than you. These things can be decided by very narrow margins, and it's easy for me to say, but I would just say try not to get too down about it. And then in terms of individual skills that are in demand at the moment, we actually at Door 10 we put a survey out recently to corporate affairs leaders asking them this very question, our team health check, and the two that were most often identified as gaps were sort of data analytics roles as well as local government specialists. So we're gonna we're going to publish our findings, which sounds a bit grand, in the new year. So yeah, look out for that. My top tips for candidates. Again, this is pretty basic stuff, so apologies, but I do think it's important. The main thing I say to everyone is to adjust your CV for every role. You need to look at what the key responsibilities for the role are and the sort of profile of the person they're looking to employ, and put that stuff as it is relevant to you as high up on your CV as possible. I always think it's helpful to remember that the first gatekeeper between your application and you successfully getting the job is likely to be a HR official who doesn't have any experience working in corporate affairs, and so they're going to come at it from quite a sort of scientific approach of sort of maybe a keyword search or just matching what you say to the criteria, and these are people who are good at their jobs, they know what they're doing, and it's a level playing field. We all have to go through the same gatekeepers to get the role, but I always think it's wise to keep that first gatekeeper in mind when first drafting your application.
Now we'll hear from Ross Picton of
Hi Stuart, thanks for inviting me to take part. I'm Ross Picton, one of the consultants at Taylor Birchwood. Taylor Birchwood was created in 2024 through the merger of two executive search firms specialised in corporate affairs, Taylor Bennett and Birchwood Knight. Including those predecessor businesses, we've got more than 40 years of experience in placing public affairs and communications candidates into senior roles. I've been with the business for coming up on 8 years and previously worked in political research as well as some time working in Brussels and Westminster, so very much steeped in this world. For me, it's really important to understand the nuances of the public affairs profession and the differences between the stereotypical lobbyist, which is often referred to as government affairs, and then the more technical elements of the function around public policy and towards regulatory affairs, which often leads on to compliance. I think for people to really succeed in this space, there are a few really critical qualities. Most importantly is to have a real curiosity about and a passion for politics. It'll be something that does extend beyond the 9 to 5. Being good with people is crucial, and that needs to cross party lines, as you'll be need to be able to help your business with all kinds of different governing parties or local authorities or international governments or devolved governments. Being passionate about your businesses or your clients is really important as well, and you should find ways to push yourself, whether that's into other parts of the corporate affairs function, so for example working with investor relations or internal communications, or into other territories to find the common issues that you can work on together. To keep pushing yourself forward, you also need to work on your skills. The idea that it's who you know, not what you know, doesn't really wash for the most senior practitioners. You need to be able to do the job well. Just as with senior media relations roles, your black book matters, but it's not enough. You need to learn how to work with new levers of political engagement as they emerge, so how to marshal your community online, how to engage through petitions, things like that. So much of the innovation in this space is going to come from elsewhere as well. So you need to work with sales and marketing to find out what they're doing and think about how the tools they use can apply to your strategy. To get to the very top of the profession, you're going to need even more skills than that. You're going to need to be a good people manager. So spend time building your team leadership and senior advisory skill sets. Being nice is absolutely crucial to going the distance in this profession. There is a real limit to how far you can go if you're seen as a tyrant. The public affairs market has become more complex over the years. It's fragmented and specialised, which has led to more work for people to focus on the public policy and regulatory specialisms. And with that, we've seen the growth of agencies that specialise in those different elements. But the counter to that is if a business has a really strong bench of technical experts, then they might turn to some really good boutique agencies that will help them to provide a really capable political fixer who will help with their issues and crisis work. The function has also professionalised massively in the last 15 years. What was once very much an old boys club, and there really was an element of a revolving door, has become far more diverse. We've seen gender balance improve massively in the wake of improvements in the representation in politics. But ethnic diversity remains lamentably pretty poor, especially for an industry which is very concentrated in London. We're helping to combat some of that through the work of the Taylor Bennett Foundation. It makes a real impact there, but it does rely on the support of industry leaders, and I'd definitely encourage people listening to this to get involved if they can. Public affairs as a function suffers from the constant pressure of a social media-led news cycle. Not having the latest thing can, leave you feeling out of the loop. If you've not seen that latest tweet or latest post, you can feel like you're running behind. As a leader, it's important to find moments to take a step back, consider your strategy, think about how you're helping your business or your clients, and think about the needs of your team to succeed in their roles as well. To thrive in public affairs, your network is going to be vital. Don't just think about that politically. Again, not just the black book, but think about the knowledge base that you bring from your politically exposed work, and the ways that makes you interesting to other people as well, and the ways that you'll have opportunities to collaborate, to help other teams and get involved in different projects. A challenge for public affairs is that leaders lean very much upon their public affairs support, and they can get stuck in a bit of an ivory tower working directly with the executive team. So I'd really encourage public affairs people to get out there on the ground in your business, listen to what people are saying, get a good gauge of sentiments, and really be able to feed that back into your senior advisory. You also need to remember that at times you're going to have to fight for your place. When things get tough, you might need to justify the function and your team. So ensure you've got a good handle on the commercial benefits that you and the team bring.
This is what Janine Emmerson of Hanson Search had to say.
Thanks so much for asking me to be part of the podcast. You asked me to start by introducing myself. So my name is Janine Emmerson. I'm the managing partner for the UK and Europe and the global public affairs lead for Hanson Search. Hanson Search is a global headhunting firm, and we focus purely on public affairs, communications and marketing. So that's at the core of all of the searches that we do. We've been in this market now for over 20 years, so bring very deep sector expertise and a clear understanding of the strategic importance of government, public affairs and communications. We operate on a global basis, so our team is based across the UK, Europe, the Middle East and North America. And what that means is it helps our clients to ensure that they can access a global network of candidates. So they might be able to look for people from their kind of local networks and their local firms, but we can also access this global network to help bring a really diverse range of candidates to all of the searches that we undertake. Our team is a mixture of ex-industry professionals and also search and recruitment professionals. So about half of our team have worked within comms or public affairs, sort of started their career there, moved up and later moved over to search. and others have sort of started in recruitment and continued within that search area. And that blend of skills is really helpful to kind of bring together the network, the understanding of the roles, the expertise, but also the search side of how to run a really good search and sort of upskilling the team around us to do that. We are an employee-owned trust with the majority owned by the employee, so our team is deeply vested in the success of Hanson Search, and we're also a B Corp certified business. So we got our B Corp status last year in 2024, and that really helped us to align our values and our purpose and ensure that we represent ourselves but also our clients in a really authentic way in the market. Diversity and inclusion is very important to us. We do a lot of work around this in the industry, both running our own events, partnering with other organisations like I Have a Voice, and supporting industry groups like Women in Public Affairs. So in terms of the current market and what we've been seeing, 2024 was a tough year, I would say, in comms and public affairs and marketing. It very much was a slow year. There were absolutely opportunities. There were roles out there, but there weren't as many as there would normally be. And decisions getting made was a little bit slow and a little bit frustrating. 25, we've seen a real change of that. It sort of started slow at the beginning of the year, but it's continued to increase and improve. We are now seeing, role numbers increasing, decisions being made much quicker, processes running much quicker. So that has really helped in terms of looking at that marketplace and having those opportunities and seeing the year. So we will, the year, obviously we're almost at the close. I'm sort of recording this in December 25, and it's been a really fantastic second half to the year. So it looks like the market is shifting and has shifted. I think now the budget is done and we're sort of past that, and there hasn't been any sort of horrendous market shock off the back of it. It looks like, we're continuing that direction. I would say at the senior end, there is still, the roles are hotly contested. There's some fantastic senior talent out there at the moment, and probably not quite enough roles for all of those people. So, that can be quite tough, I think, if you're looking for a role at that level. But it really is sort of about finding the right opportunities for you, and I'll come on to talk about that a little bit more. On the agency side, I've had a number of conversations in the last few months actually about their public affairs teams in agencies and looking at sort of how that's structured, how they move it forward, what the offer is. So again, I think there's been a kind of, because of all of the political happenings both in the UK and globally, public affairs has been given more of a spotlight and sort of seen as more of an importance both in agencies and in our in-house clients. So that's helping to really strengthen that marketplace too. I guess the other sort of hot topic of conversation, which seems to be in most of the things I'm talking about, is AI and how that will affect the industry. And, at what point, will that take jobs? If so, what are those jobs and what does that look like? I don't think there's a definite conclusion on that. I've heard various different theories, but I think, embedding AI in any organisation and certainly upskilling yourself in AI is really, really important in today's marketplace. Now, in terms of, what makes a great public affairs professional, I think, very much depends on the role in terms of exactly what that looks like. But as a sort of broad brush, a genuine passion for politics, curiosity to learn and that sort of strategic thinking, but also the ability to deal with ambiguity and to be in a constantly changing environment and thriving in that environment. Some people can find that quite frustrating, whereas if you can sort of dial into that and enjoy that and everything that brings and you learn from, I think that's a really positive thing within the public affairs industry. I'd say business development skills, if you're thinking on the agency side, are very hotly in demand at the moment. That's a reflection of the fact that the market has been tougher, and it is probably tougher to do that. But if that's an area you enjoy, that is absolutely something to hone in on, because I would say all the senior searches we have in agencies at the moment, business development is a huge part of that. And I think it's important to be able to showcase what you have done within business development to be able to really kind of show your strengths in that area. I think the other thing that is really important is to be able to showcase how you have moved the dial on a particular piece of legislation or policy. What were the actions that you took? What was the campaign? How did you go about that? And how did that lead to a change? Because sometimes I think the sort of end of the story can get lost, and that's something really important to look at. And then I think, the other thing that a lot of our clients look for is people who can bring a very balanced but confident opinion to, what are often some quite difficult situations, to really give genuine strategic advice and not just what a client or a CEO might want to hear, but how can you sort of use your understanding and showcase your knowledge to provide a very balanced argument. In terms of sort of top tips that you've asked for, and if people were thinking to make a next career move, there's probably a couple of things that I would point out. Firstly, do keep your CV up to date. I know many of us don't do this, but updating your CV sort of every 6 months is really a good practice to get into, because it is very easy to forget what you've delivered, what that campaign involved, what that winning that client meant, etc. So trying to just keep abreast of updating your CV every 6 months, will pay dividends at the point you come to move. I think also when you are career planning, don't be afraid to take a sideways move if that takes you to your ultimate goal. Many people I see, working in the industry focus on moving up and being promoted and getting to the next level. And if the sort of next level up or the top job in your organization is the job you want, then that is absolutely fine. But often, moving up and becoming more senior in an organization, the job changes quite significantly from the job you're starting out at. So if actually a sort of commercial role isn't what you're looking for, then perhaps, a sideways move to get you into a sort of a slightly different area could be right. So just thinking about where's your ultimate goal and how do you get there? And it's not always a sort of a linear upward trajectory. Sometimes, there's a few sideways moves to get you to that ultimate place. And then finally, in terms of sort of interview preparation, preparing for interviews is always difficult. And I think particularly now that a lot of them are on Teams, or certainly some of the stages are on Teams, my advice would actually be to record yourself on Teams doing an interview. It's slightly painful to watch and to do, but it's really eye-opening to see how you interact with the camera. It's much harder to build rapport on Teams. And seeing how you do it, or whether you do it, I think is a really good practice to get into. So as I said, slightly painful to do, but I think will bring a lot of reward and will really help you to hone your skills doing Teams interviews.
Alec Zetter of Vox Partners gave us this contribution.
Alec, why don't you introduce Vox Partners and what we do?
And thank you, Stuart, for asking us to come on your podcast. We were very grateful to be asked. We are Vox Partners. We are a specialist policy, public affairs and communications headhunting firm. We are a founder-led business and we work with a range of organisations across trade, membership and professional bodies. We work with businesses and we do a little bit of work in the charity sector and public sector as well. So combined, we have over 20 years worth of recruitment experience, and when you add some time in the industry on both sides into that, we come at this with over 30 years worth of experience. This is a candidate pool we know incredibly well. It is a market we know incredibly well. And Vox Partners is the next evolution of that. So part of the point of this podcast is to look at public affairs professionals specifically. I think one thing that everybody is really interested in is, James, what makes a great public affairs professional?
The unifying thing that makes great public affairs professionals great is the way that they have worked their networks over the years. Having a pool of people who you've built meaningful relationships with throughout your career is central to everything. It's not about the transaction in the moment. It's about the journeys that you go on together over the course of your careers. And people who have been successful and sit at the top of this game, they all have a pool of people they know they can tap into at critical moments. And that isn't because they only call them when they need them. It's because they looked upon their career as a opportunity to build relationships.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that, of course, has to be built on a basic level of competency in certain areas. I think if you look at it, you have to have fantastic, political and policy awareness. You have to understand how the system works. You've got to understand the opportunities to engage along the way. I think you need to have great relationship building and stakeholder engagement skills. That is an absolutely crucial part, not only of what James says about building your network, but about the delivery of the day-to-day in the role as well. And I think the final thing, and there are some exceptional people in this space who could demonstrate this, is, you have to be a great communicator.
Which leads quite nicely into this idea, doesn't it, around career development and progression. That relationship building piece is central. People who were coming up when you were coming up or were more junior than you were, you'd be amazed how quickly they become the corporate affairs directors of the future. Maintaining relationships with people across the board is really important. There was a piece of advice that somebody gave on a recent episode of our Vox Pops podcast around a piece of advice they give to their more junior self. And it was the power of saying yes and knowing when to say no. I think it is really important early on in your career to throw yourself at as many different projects and opportunities as possible, no matter how left field they might seem. I think one of a unifying thing about corporate affairs professionals generally is that they're often seen as being really capable across a number of different disciplines, and you can do more than just public affairs or just comms. So the earlier on in your career you can say yes to stuff, the better. Be generous with your time, but also recognise the things that are going to take away from your energy to do the job properly. So that's where this element of being able to say no is important as well. You have to know where you're going. Yeah. And does this activity feed into my development, or is it going to suck energy away from the core disciplines of what I do? And that's something Alec has to pull me back on all the time.
And I guess the advice is different at different stages of your career, James. There are some unifying bits of advice that run true, but maybe if I just quickly reflect on the kind of advice you would give to somebody looking to start out in this world, is somebody who we both hold very dearly used to say to us in this world, it's really important to be both interesting and interested. I think the point being, in the early stages of career, you have to get involved in as much as you possibly can. A lot of people do it through working in Parliament, where you are living and breathing politics on a day-to-day basis. Other people do it through working in a consultancy, where you're being thrown from one client to another. But by throwing yourselves into these types of environments, you can learn so much so quickly. Find an environment that works for you, where you can put a lot in, but you'll also get a lot out of. And James, I guess maybe if we're looking at the other end of the spectrum, some people, directors of corporate affairs, maybe even chief executives who we speak to a lot. Any thoughts on a piece of advice for them?
For senior folk, I think there is a really interesting point when you get to a certain level in your career, in that there are a couple of things that have happened to you. You've probably got almost every job you've interviewed for, and then suddenly you're interviewing against all the other people who got almost every job they've ever interviewed for. So a degree of patience when it comes to your own career development, once you get to a certain point, is really, really key. I think when you're becoming an expert and when you're exceptional, the way to get to exceptional is to accept that there is a period in your career where it will feel like it's plateauing. You might get used to a promotion every 3 years or a promotion every 2 years. But the reality is, when you get to that director level and beyond, to the exec, there's only one job in every organization, and you have to do it and do it well for a couple of cycles. We talk to people about this all the time. If you get promoted in a job you're unhappy with, or an organization you're unhappy at, you have to accept that you have to stay in that job for 2 or 3 years before you're going to be seen as that person to the outside world. So it's this understanding of the fact that the work becomes deeper, more meaningful in lots of different ways, but it does mean that the timelines for progression elongate as you grow more experienced.
I love that advice, and I guess from a recruiter perspective, how often do you see it where you get to the final stage of a process for a director of corporate affairs or a chief executive, and the feedback from the client is, I could appoint all of these people, 3, 4, 5 people. And from a candidate perspective, that leaves 3 or 4 really frustrated people every time, because the margins are tiny and you miss out this time. And you don't always experience that throughout your career until you get to the point where you are just in a candidate pool of equally exceptional people. And I think to understand that and to go into it with that mindset can be, I think, just really sort of enlightening almost for your job applications.
Yeah. And I think that leads quite nicely into this idea around what tips to give candidates, right? That's a really interesting and difficult question to ask because everyone wants to know. The thing that I find resonates with people and is the most effective thing to do is to accept the fact that being transactional in a job search, and what I mean by that is doom scrolling and just applying for everything, is not going to get you where you want to be. So don't do it. Don't spend time scrolling through job boards and doing all of that. The way I phrase it is let the job market wash over you. Have your relationships with your recruiters, make sure they know what you're looking for. Get your job alert set up, and then go back to what we started this conversation talking about, your network. You'd be amazed how often your next job is going to come through somebody who knows you, who's referred you, or somebody who knows you and rates you and is going to offer you a role. So if you invest in your network, the role will appear as if from nowhere, but it's not from nowhere. It's because you've spent time in your network. So the hardest bit of advice to take, but the most effective bit of advice to take is that one. Spend your time having coffees and catch-ups with people who already know and love you. And the next big thing will appear as if from nowhere.
And I would also just add to that, don't neglect your online network as well.
No.
Face-to-face.
Necessary evil.
It is, and the phrase you used there is doom scrolling, James. And I think everybody in life would be advised not to do so. But maybe spend that time proactively building your brand. Is your LinkedIn in good condition? Are readers of your LinkedIn understanding of who you are, what you're looking for, what your career objectives are? Are you promoting yourself and the things you do via LinkedIn? We had a client who is a director general of one of the largest membership organizations in the country. And we were sat opposite them in the very first meeting. And they said to us quite point blank, if I am recruiting somebody who is going to be the face of my organization, I don't want to go on and see a completely dormant LinkedIn. Because if they're not promoting themselves and they're not promoting the organization they currently work for, it's a real jump for me to think, they're going to switch that on when they come through the door here. Yeah, less doom scrolling and more, positive, proactive content, I would suggest.
I heard something yesterday. We doom scroll 300 meters worth of social media every day, 300 meters on average, right? So use it effectively. If you're going to do it, right, get to the end as quickly as possible. And if the end result is looking for a job, make sure you're using that in the right way and you're engaging with stuff that is interesting.
Sorry to interrupt, James, but I guess if we are all doing that much scrolling per day, make sure you're in the middle of that.
Yeah, 100%.
Make sure if people are out there scrolling and you have an opportunity to land in their scroll, put something interesting out. Make sure they hesitate as they scroll past you. You have to put yourself out there in the same way you would in person and online. And necessary evil is a beautiful way of summarising it, I think, James.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about trends in the public affairs market, job market.
I think when you consider the public affairs market, you do have to consider what's going on in the wider world as well. We have had a tumultuous 5 or 6 years that have, in 2021 and 2022, provided the most unique candidate experience literally ever since sort of records began, in that you would dip your toe in the market. There were so many opportunities out there. You might come back with 3, 4, 5 job offers. The reality of where we are now and where we have been for the last 18 months is that isn't the case anymore. The Recruitment and Employment Confederation, who we are members of, do a monthly sort of job summary and the data behind it. And what they're seeing at the moment is since 1997, which I believe is when they started compiling this report, what we're experiencing at the moment is not the sharpest dip in numbers of jobs, but the longest, most sustained dip since 1998, 1999, when there was the sort of fallout of the financial crash. So the scene within which the public affairs sort of market has to be looked at is not as good as some people would hope. I firmly believe, and I think James is of this opinion, and I suspect most of our peers are as well, that policy, public affairs and communications has firmly established itself as a business critical function. And what that means is that most organizations will recruit when they have to. They lose somebody, they will re-recruit. What we're not seeing at the moment, because some of this backdrop, as discussed, is those investment hires, those new hires that a business might hope to make. But the market is good. I would urge people to be optimistic. But what I think we do have to look at is the market we're seeing at the moment is the new normal. It is how the market is going to sustain itself for the foreseeable future, and thus you've got to be really targeted and take on some of the other advice when it comes to job searching.
Absolutely. Well, there you go. That's our views, the views from Vox Towers, as it were, on the market, and hopefully that's helpful to people in terms of their own career development.
If you were looking for a job today, James, I hope you're not, but if you were looking for a job in our world today, what would be the first 3 things you did?
Okay, so the first thing I would do is I would try and find 3 people every week who I've worked with and enjoyed working with, and go and have coffee with them, just to have a chat. The second thing I would do is make sure I get a couple of introductions out of each of those 3 meetings as well every week. And the third thing I would do is make sure my LinkedIn profile and activity is absolutely on point. You?
It's hard to disagree with any of them. I mean, one thing just maybe to add on the LinkedIn, because people probably think, we're going in heavy on this, but I think I'm happy to say publicly that when I get an email from somebody or when somebody gets in contact, before I've even read their CV, I will go onto their LinkedIn, such is the importance of it, because I do want to I will go back and read your CV, but I want to get a little bit of a sense for the person. I want to understand a bit about their personality. I want to understand some of the things that they're interested in. And, then if that catches my attention, I will go back and thoroughly read the CV. But, LinkedIn is a gateway, man. It is absolutely crucial.
Totally. Excellent. Well, I hope everybody finds that helpful, and see you at the top.
See you at the top.
Rohan Shah of Reuben Sinclair had these insights.
Hi, I'm Rohan Shah, the co-founder of Reuben Sinclair. We're a specialist recruitment consultancy connecting outstanding corporate and public affairs professionals with businesses across the globe. We've got a sort of deep and sort of diverse network that spans agency and in-house opportunities. And I regularly am responsible for providing senior level counsel and leading executive search mandates, as well as internal talent management and recruitment processes for organisations operating in high stakes comms positions. If you ask me what makes a great public affairs professional, from my vantage point, working day in and day out with public affairs professionals across agencies, in-house teams and industry bodies, I do get a very clear picture of what truly sets the great ones apart. And the first thing that I see is a deep understanding of how the government and systems actually work. So it's not just who sits where in Westminster, but how decisions are influenced, where the pressure points are, how policy, business priorities and public sentiment interact. I think the best PA professionals can read, the political weather quite instinctively, and they can stay 2 steps ahead. Secondly, I think great public affairs people have exceptional relationship intelligence. They know how to build rapport quickly. They can adapt their style. They earn trust with stakeholders across the spectrums. Politicians, regulators, special advisors, clients, internal leaders. So it's not just networking, it's really the ability to create meaningful, long-term relationships that can really deliver influence. And the third thing that I see, I really notice people who combine sort of strategic judgment with this flawless delivery or execution. I think it's rare to see someone who can both shape the policy strategy and then deliver the submissions, lines, briefings and stakeholder engagement that really bring it to life. The most successful ones for me, they're very adept at switching between macro and micro without losing momentum. And finally, great public affairs professionals show a real calm, resilience and professionalism. I think in fast-moving, often ambiguous environments, whether it's legislation dropping unexpectedly, a client crisis, shifting political priorities, it's the people who stay level-headed and really solutions-focused are the ones that really stand out in the market. When it comes to career development and progression, to anyone really looking to build strong and sustainable public affairs career, whether you're just starting out or whether you're aiming for leadership, it's really about being intentional about your growth. So if you're early in your career,
I'd really urge you to seek out breadth. And that's really sort of looking at getting exposure to different policy areas, different sectors, clients, campaign work and writing. It gives you a much bigger platform to specialise in later. But as you progress, it's really important to find your own niche. I think being the go-to person in a specific sector or policy area, whether that's energy, health, transport, tech, financial services, this makes you significantly more valuable, and it will definitely help accelerate your progression. I also say don't underestimate the importance of internal credibility. Public affairs leadership is not just, well, I guess it's no longer just about government relations. It's also about being a trusted advisor to the CEO, to comms teams, legal, regulatory, sustainability, but also the board as a whole. How you operate internally matters as much as your external stakeholder map. And finally, it's really important. We talk about this a lot to a lot of the candidates we work with. It's about building your own personal brand. Really contribute to consultations, publish thought leadership wherever you can, speak at events, stay visible in your network. For me, people remember those who add value beyond their immediate role. When it comes to trends in the public affairs job market, right now, we're seeing a particularly strong demand across regulated and, I guess, politically sensitive sectors: energy and net zero, health and life sciences, financial services, transport, infrastructure and housing. So organisations in these spaces are facing quite a lot of scrutiny and rapid policy change, which is obviously driving investment in public affairs capability. I think hybrid skill sets continue to be in demand. Employers are increasingly looking for individuals who can operate across public affairs, corporate communications, policy, issues management, and even reputation strategy. I think there's a real growing expectation also around digital capability, so using data, insights, online stakeholder tools to help really shape engagement strategies. And as ever, political transitions drive movement. So as organisations reevaluate their engagement strategies, they're really looking for people who understand how to influence effectively within new political realities. I think my top tips for any candidates that are thinking about their next move, I would say if you're planning your next career step, there are sort of 5 key points that I would recommend. Number one is, craft a clear narrative, be able to articulate your strengths, the value that you can bring, and the areas that you're genuinely passionate about. Employers really respond to clarity and conviction. And as a recruiter, I can genuinely hear this when speaking to candidates. Number 2 would be show impact, not just your experience. So focus really on the outcomes: policy changes, successful influencing, risk mitigation, strengthened relationships. Hiring managers care far more about the impact than job titles. The third thing would be strategic about your next role. Really choose roles that build the skills, your sector exposure and influence that you'll need 3 to 5 years from now. Don't just move for the sake of movement. You've really got to look at moving with purpose. Number 4 would be prepare deeply for interviews. Really understand the organisation's policy challenges, recent consultations, committee activity, regulatory pressures, stakeholder landscape. Speak their language, not just your own. And finally, number 5 would be for those operating at a senior level, really recognise what's driving demand in agencies specifically, or in working for a firm. The ability to provide high quality senior counsel, manage complex accounts, and act as a true advisor to your clients is more important than ever. This is also the same for people working in-house. But also for firms and for agencies, new business capability is paramount in this market. Bringing in work, spotting growth opportunities, pitching effectively, it's becoming a core expectation for senior hires. So being commercially minded doesn't sort of detract from your policy expertise. It actually, amplifies your impact and positions you as a real strategic leader.